my title indicates three aspects of Tagore. One is whether he is a Rishi, full grown, and as a poet singer, and then a liberator. So I will just take them one by one and discuss them. So let me start with Tagore. As I have said, he was a person who was between man and Rishi. It shows that he is not a full-grown Rishi, and at the same time he is not man, he is slightly above man. It's an interesting position, and he is a sadhak, which is often denied by critics and biographers and Marxist critics. And but if we examine his life, we see that in 1902, his wife died, and he was only 31 years old then. He was only 31-year-old then. So he didn't marry after that. So one reason why he didn't marry is that he was remarried. He was not interested, because that shows that he was not interested in being in a bondage. So recent biographers have indicated, including Tagore Dyson, that Tagore had quite a few affairs with women of different ages. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So Dyson and others have indicated and explained and authenticated that he had strong bonds with quite a few women in India and abroad. So that has given rise to the belief that Tagore is not a sadhaka, and he is just a poet and a singer and other things. But the certificate comes from one of the giants of spirituality. Two giants of spirituality. One is Sri Aurobindo, and the other is called the Arjuna of the modern age. His name is Nolinikant Gupta. He is a great critic of Bengali literature, and he's a great writer also. But he remains silent. Very few people know about him. Both of them have strongly suggested that Tagore was much in the path of spirituality. Even Sri Aurobindo went on to claim that he was on the same path as ours. And then Sri Aurobindo says, in his own way. And that has to be explained, because that is not explained. Plenty of these quotations have been quite in the air for the last 30 years, 40 years, but without any explanation. We need to explain what does Sri Aurobindo mean by in the way, in his own way. I suspect that Sri Aurobindo was meaning Tagore's power of music, which is almost a spiritual power for him. And music, as the mother says, is the most powerful means of self-opening. Then the concept of Jivan Devata, which has once again been a headache for the critics. Now, people have fought, people have argued, given their own explanations, even written a book. My ex-vice chancellor has written a book on that. Unfortunately, what is Jivan Devata? What does Tagore mean by Jivan Devata? Cannot be understood without a reference to the Upanishads. And of course, those are interested in Sri Aurobindo, they can go through Sri Aurobindo and find it. But this Jivan Devata is actually in the Upanishad, it is called Angushta Matra Purusha Antaratma. And in Katha Upanishad, in Setasatara Upanishad, in Bhagavad Purana, and in Taittiriya Upanishad, it comes, and it is something like a flame, fire. Now, this, I believe, my friend Supriya Bhattacharya, who died last year unfortunately in COVID, he also believed in this, that Jivan Devata is that part of the soul which evolves from birth to birth. That is called Chaitya Purusa, the part of the soul that evolves from birth to birth, or initiates an evolution of consciousness. And whenever I read Tagore again and again, the idea of Jivan Devata creeps in, and it indicates his sadhana. And the point is, he was an aesthete, and he was unique in a way in the path of spirituality. He was a unique thing. There is no other example like his. A mighty genius, a mighty poet. And at the same time, he had a lifelong aspiration for the infinite. Even if you go through his early poetry, which was influenced mainly by the Vaishnava Padavali. Now, critics once again, they have found only the outer aspects of Vaishnava Padavali and the lab aspect, the sensuous aspects in those poetry. Udiyo Komal, for instance. They have found the sensuous aspects. But poems like Nijhare Swapnabhango and many other poems, almost all the poems, have definite clues to a yearning, Vyapulata, for the spirit, for the Supreme Spirit. And despite the fact, this is very strange, that he was surrounded by the prettiest of women in the world, this call was never wiped out. So he is a very unique sadhaka. Nobody could stop him, despite all his weaknesses. And maybe he played some original technique, used some original technique to convert this weakness into strength. And poetry and songs, of course, are obvious tendencies that we see in Tagore, that through them he is trying to elevate his consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo uses very significant, all the phrases Sri Aurobindo uses for Tagore in the future poetry are extremely important, and the phrases need to be examined, clarified, explained, expanded, because Sri Aurobindo spoke in above them, very, very briefly and indicated. So we have to see what he meant by those apophthegmatic words in the future poetry that chant-filled realms is a word he uses. Chant-filled realms, and it relates, it refers to what he himself says, poet singer. And there are other phrases like constant passing of the borders. Of which border Sri Aurobindo is speaking? There is in Tagore a constant overpassing of the borders. And he also says this poetry has an assured sign, has assured signs of sadhana. That he writes in the chapter called The Ideal Spirit of Poetry, very important chapter in the future poetry, which we had in our syllabus at Vishwabharati, and we still have it in Vishwabangla University. He says, his Tagore's poetry shows us an assured sign or assured signs of sadhana. That is very interesting. It comes from Sri Aurobindo, who is at the height, supreme height of spirituality. He says there is an assured sign. Now then we cannot take. Whenever you see any Bengali critic speaking on Tagore, they bypass the issue, except for the old ones. The new ones who are fashionable Marxists, they delink Tagore with the Upanishads and the Rig Veda, which is not done, because the entire fire symbolism of Tagore, Aguner Poroshmuni Shoma Prane, Aj Taray Taray Dipto Shikhar Ogni Jale Nitra Vihin Govan Tale. All these plenty of images of fire creeping in Tagore's poetry in every age, from the early poetry, later poetry, middle poetry. And this fire is related to Jivan Devata or Chaitya Purusha, or what Sri Aurobindo calls the psychic being. Now, there is a natural aspiration in this person, very natural. It was there, inherent. He came with that power, and nobody could stop him. Despite all the, he was doing all his earthly duties, materialistic works, but that call is all the time there. Aayega aane wala aayega. This yearning that somebody is coming. All my years I've been hearing his footsteps. This is extremely important in Tagore. And although he refused idol worship, because he was a Brahma, Brahmas do not practice idol worship. But throughout Tagore's poetry and literature, especially in poetry, and except even in the songs, which Sangyukta Das Gupta has translated quite a few songs entitled Swades from Vishwabharati. And you must have read Sugata Bose's book, The Nation as Mother. And both Sri Aurobindo and Tagore and others have linked this mother with the world mother, the universal mother. So Tagore was, as text is the greatest guide, text is the surest guide. If you go by the text, then it becomes clear that he is a mother worshipper. Ma bolite pran kore anchan chokhe ashe jol pore. If one says, if one utters these words, we can feel what he means. The aspiration of his soul, his best self, the inmost subliminal being. which is inside us as a spark of the divine. So we cover the part. A man who did not attain to Rishihood proper, neither he was an ordinary man. As I've said, he was unique. So he was in between man and Rishi, just very close to Rishihood. And the second aspect in the title is poet singer. Now, as he has said, Gane Gane Tabu Bandhano Jaktuke. Gane Gane Tabu Bandhano Jaktuke. So, it is clear again and again that something is there. This music is a full-time affair for Tagore. And most probably Sri Aurobindo meant in his own way his music. Because it was something which is not going to go very easily. It has survived a century and it will survive still. Why? And it relates Tagore's songs to Sri Aurobindo's theory of poetry as mantra of the real. And talking of this return of the mantra in literature, Sri Aurobindo starts with Walt Whitman, who was Sri Aurobindo's most favorite poet. He influenced Sri Aurobindo, and of course the ashram people don't like this. If I say Sri Aurobindo was influenced by some poets, they believe that Sri Aurobindo cannot be influenced. But every poet has a tradition. And when Subramania Swami greeted Sri Aurobindo in Pondicherry and asked him which poet to follow to write good poetry, Sri Aurobindo said Walt Whitman. And my wife has shown how Whitman is strongly related to Sri Aurobindo and how indebted Sri Aurobindo is to Walt Whitman, although in the last 10 years of his life, Sri Aurobindo left Whitman far behind in substance. Because that range of spirituality was beyond the range of Walt Whitman. But the structure, the outward form, although Whitman wrote free verse and Sri Aurobindo wrote in meter, he also wrote quantitative free verse, long lines where the meaning is contained in the entire line. So this is the revival, and it's a dynamic revival. Sri Aurobindo never said it is going to stop here. He said these are the signs: Whitman, Tagore, Carpenter, the Irish poets, W.B. Yeats included. And they are this revival that glorifies Tagore, and Sri Aurobindo says the rapid immediate fame of Tagore. Because humanity is athirst for this kind of poetry. Humanity is athirst for this kind of poetry when Tagore started writing. And he became an overnight celebrity. And even when Tagore is, people think that only in Puja Purja, the devotional songs of Tagore, they are the only mantric poetry or poetry as mantra. But I don't think this is right. Because there is an overlapping of emotion in Tagore's love poetry, in Tagore's poetry of nature, in Tagore's poems entitled Vichitro, where you see that passion for the infinite and that overlapping from the ordinary woman to someone beyond, the quest for the infinite, beyond the material object. So this is, and another interesting thing is that, which is a new thing, and maybe I am speaking it out, I can write it again because some people will start writing this, because I have noted this, this is my original thought, that Tagore blends the Vaishnava and the Shakta in his lyric poetry. And when Shankha Ghosh wrote Ye Ami Raboro, it's a good book, otherwise it's very well written, it has originality also, but he could have touched on this topic that it is a blend of, but the Marxists have a tendency, they won't say Tagore is a spiritual poet or mystic poet. This is very unfortunate, because they can't say it. Their law of being does not permit it to call Tagore a mystic or a spiritual poet. Now, about Rabindra Sangeet. What is the thing exactly, and how mantra is born, the science or art of new creation in poetry. So previously it was, the stress was on sur, on the tune, and Tagore introduced modernism in Indian music, modernism of a very high quality, and he said, no, we are not going to be bound by the strict grammatical rules, but we will follow our soul, and if Purvi mixes up with Sri and creates Aji Ananda Sandhaya or Pina Bajaoge Homo Antare, then I will let it go like that, because it's a new creation. And many people do not know that the Tagorean tradition was followed in Bombay from 1941 to 1968. It is not known. Very unfortunate, because the Bengalis are tied up with Tagore. And let me explain first about Tagore's creation, the mystery of his creation. The word is not always the best poetry. The sur is not always the best expression of, say, Kedar, one of the 4 gems of Kalyan. Kedar Kamod Hamir Chanot. So, Dake Baro Baro Baro, when it is formed, the word and the tune, they are married and they create a third something. Which is neither music, neither poetry. In quite a few songs of Tagore, this happens. Small songs, poetry has sacrificed, and the song, the raga has sacrificed. But the blending, the marriage of the two elements, words and sur, have created a third something, which is a new creation. Much later, Naushad and others in Bombay, they added the instrument with it to create a 4th dimension to it. But it was part of Tagore's, because mantric poetry is discovery. So Rabindra says it is a discovery. The poet is a magician who hardly knows the secret of his own spell, because it's a discovery. It is there. The vibration is there and it is discovered. Unlike T.S. Eliot's theory of poetry, which comes from the brain, it comes from the center of our heart or from above. So in Shakespeare we had that discovery, and in Sri Aurobindo and in Tagore. And the most striking thing is that Tagore did it in a language on which Sri Aurobindo was not speaking. Sri Aurobindo was speaking on English literature. But he brings Tagore as an example of this kind of poetry, mantric poetry or poetry of incantation. And he repeatedly indicates that it is music. Because in ancient times, poetry was music and it was sung. It was not philosophy, it was not teaching, it was not preaching. It was just sight. The poet saw and sang. As Plato has indicated in his smallest of dialogues, Ion, and he uses the word divine enthusiasmos. That is the exact synonym for Sri Aurobindo's mantra. So this when a person throughout his life, say about 2000, of the 2000 poems, songs, 1000 are mantra, then it shows, as Sri Aurobindo says, it is an assured sign of sadhana. It's a whole time affair. So whatever he does outside, he's mixing with girls, his engagement, even he was mad about award for his paintings in the 1930s when he was quite mature. At the same time, that yearning, kya jaane dil ki kasti kab tak lagegi na, that yearning for the infinite was throughout there, and it was a steady fire. Even in the later poems of Tagore, which is, many people think they are different. Nunirikanta Gupta has said no. They are different, but they are not contradictory. And Shishidda has said, Shishir Kumar Ghosh, in the very first line of later poems of Tagore, the first of Tagore lights up the last. So throughout his life there is a kind of sadhana, and through music. And there is a slight difference between mystic poetry and spiritual poetry. Mystic poetry is, in Tagore, he first created that rahasyamayata, that mystery about the divine. And ও দেখা দিয়ে যে চলে গেল, চুপি চুপি যে বলে গেল, and this whispering, this sudden come and go shadows, and but not specific something, as the mother sees in the prayers and meditations. Thou hast passed over my life like a great wave of Lord, like a great wave of love, O Lord. Thou hast passed like a great wave of love over my life. The mother says like this because she sees it. But for Tagore, it is a rahasya, a mysterious feeling. It is infinite. So Nunirikanta Gupta says that he is in the borderline. Mystic poetry is in the borderline of truth. Think of the post office. Amal cannot specify for what his soul is yearning. He cannot specify. He just tries to say, Dure, Dure, Pachmura Hills, for the call of the kites. So this is called mysticism, and this is very interesting and more interesting than spiritual poetry, because spiritual poetry is very bare. That is why Sri Aurobindo's poetry is less popular than Tagore's poetry. Because Sri Aurobindo's sight realization is spiritual. He writes spiritual poetry proper. He is not on the borderline always. He is on the borderline sometimes. He writes Tagorean poetry sometimes, like the Dreamboat. But mostly in Savitri and also in the sonnets, he has crossed the border. And for Tagore, Sri Aurobindo says there is a constant overpassing of the borders. Then there are some examples. At the moment, I remember one example which I like very much. Ei lovinu songo tobo sundoro he sundoro. If you see the whole structure of the poem, it speaks of an intimacy and a union. So not always Tagore was a mystic poet. Sometimes he crossed the borderline and entered the spiritual domain. Ei lohinu songo tobo. I have got you, your companion. I can see you. Dhonno holo antoro. Because I have touched you. I have seen you. These are rare things in Tagore because mostly he is bypassing this because he is in love with the path, not with the goal. But that makes him the most interesting poet, one of the most interesting poets in the world. So this is the difference between mystic poetry and spiritual poetry, and it is related to Tagore as a poet singer because in almost all the songs you will see this, that not say, who not, like the mother says you, thou, not like that. It is, Tagore is always speculating, mystifying, and that makes him interesting. But this is a way human consciousness can take it. Why then the last point, liberator? Why is he a liberator? Because human consciousness can take this poetry and enjoy it, and can form a bridge to the Upanishads, to Sri Aurobindo, and to the Rig Veda. So, surprisingly enough, Tagore's spiritual status was quite high, much higher than many modern gurus with triple Sris, Sri, endless Sris. But Tagore was far more superior in spiritual capacity than them. But he never pretended to be a guru. He stayed apart, and whatever he preached through his poetry. Poetry was his teaching. Poetry was his revelation, and poetry was a means of elevating human consciousness. That is the charm of Tagore's poetry. It elevates human consciousness, and without the change of consciousness, there cannot be any change in human society. So he never claimed guruhood. Any other person would have been a great guru, because Tagore was an advanced sadhak. And when he writes, Jodi e amaro hridayo duaro bandho rahe go Prabhu, the entire poem is psychic. When he writes love poetry, he says, Keno noyono apni bhese jay. And this is Tagore's concept of the surplus. Keno noyono apni bhese jay, jole noyono apni bhese jay. He doesn't know about his surplus. And it is not love poetry proper. It is pointing to something else, something beyond. And Ami je gan gai jani ne se kar uddeshe. It is in the love prem purja. But it speaks of something else, and overlapping is there. Jani ne kar uddeshe. And all the time he cannot come out of this. The divine is there. As he says, blessings have I won in this world of the all beautiful. Blessings have I won in this world of the all beautiful. This world is all beautiful, and here I have got my blessings, because this life, matter is secret God. And as Sri Aurobindo said, I had hoped to build a rainbow bridge marrying the soil to the sky. Tagore said, I love this earth. Everything is there in this earth. So that is how I explain these three terms between man and Rishi, then the poet singer, and the liberator. Liberator because without an elevated aesthetics, which is now reaching out to the masses also, that is good, because Sri Aurobindo's philosophy speaks of the natural passover or lifting from the lower to the higher, and those who have gone higher will drag up the lower. And so this poetry can refine human consciousness, and sometimes it is densely Sanskritic. Sanskrit is not a dead frame of reference. Sanskrit can enlighten you. Sanskrit clarifies your consciousness. That was Rabindranath Tagore. Thank you.